So the phrase I really like to use is, you provide, the child decides. So you as the caregiver, as the adult, you are providing the environment, you are providing the food, the tools, the seating, you can take care of all of that. That's your role. The child's role is to decide how much, if any, of that food they want to eat. There's 2 rules with Tasted, and it's that you don't have to try it, and you don't have to like it. And that's absolutely crucial to really taking that pressure off and allowing children to get curious with their food.
Hello and welcome to the Debrief podcast. Today we're focusing on the role nutrition plays in child development, behaviour, Ofsted readiness and the day-to-day operational realities of running nurseries in England. I'm joined today by Catherine Lippe, Head of Nutrition and Policy at Nursery Kitchen. Catherine brings a unique perspective, having worked across NHS, public health nutrition, government policy and the early years sector. She's led national conversations around early years nutrition, including policy work, launched in Parliament, and now supports settings across England to improve food provision and outcomes for children. Nursery Kitchen itself works with over 160 partners and also operates its own chain of nurseries. So today's discussion is grounded in real operational experience as well as evidence and policy insight. The aim is to move beyond theory and give you practical, implementable guidance you can use in your settings straight away. Hello, Catherine. How are you?
Hi, Paul. I'm good, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Good. Well, thank you for joining us. It's really excellent. I'm really excited for today. I've got a series of questions and I'm really looking forward to get started. So if you're comfortable, we'll go straight ahead.
Yes, please do.
Fantastic. Catherine, if a nursery gets nutrition wrong, what's the real developmental consequence for children beyond physical health?
Yeah, good question. So, there are a range of consequences for children's physical health, but also for their future health and wellbeing outcomes, their educational outcomes as well. And I think, this is why we're so focused on early years. We hear a lot about the first 1,000 days of life. And when it comes to nutrition, what we're talking about with that first 1,000 days is the point from conception all the way through to the child's second birthday. And that has a really critical impact on a child's future health outcomes, their wellbeing outcomes, their educational outcomes. What we know from research is that in that first 1,000 days, a child's brain is growing more rapidly than at any other point in their life. So actually providing the right fuel and the right nutrition at that point is really helping to create those building blocks for their cognitive development, for their memory, for their attention, their focus, and their kind of educational outcomes as well later on. So it's really, really important. And I would actually argue that it goes beyond that first 1,000 days, and that first 5 years is really, really crucial. We know from research that actually if we don't get it right in those first 1,000 days, or particularly for that first sort of 5-year period, that the early years period that we're talking about, it can have consequences for mental health outcomes. It can have consequences for educational learning outcomes. There's more increased risk of things like depression and other mental health conditions later on. So it's not just the physical health. It is cognitive health and development. But also we know that if we get it right in those early years, that's when children's eating preferences, their feeding behaviours are really being set. So what we're exposing children to in terms of food and nutrition in those early years is setting their preferences for how they are going to eat much later on in life. And that has huge consequences for their later health outcomes, because we know that if we get nutrition right, we can do preventative things for, preventing against certain types of cancers, cardiovascular disease, helping to prevent against things like obesity, type 2 diabetes. All of those things are hugely impacted by health and lifestyle. So if we get that right in the early years, we can put children in really good stead for having more positive health outcomes, educational outcomes and wellbeing outcomes for many, many years to come.
WMC Training is a leading childcare-specific apprenticeship training provider and the sponsor of this podcast. WMC Training is the natural choice for training and development based on the relationship that we build with our clients and our learners and the quality of our provision. To find out more, visit us at wmctraining.co.uk or call us free on 0800 6 44 68 77. Where do you think are the biggest nutritional gaps for children in the UK currently?
Yeah, great question. So again, what we know from things like the National Diet and Nutrition Survey, which looks at what children are eating in those first few years of life, we know that children are getting too much in the way of free sugars, they're getting too much energy overall, too much saturated fat. And all of those things have consequences for putting children more at risk of things like obesity, a huge impact on tooth decay. And that's one of the leading reasons why children under the age of 5 will go under general anaesthetic in hospital. It's one of the biggest reasons why they have to go into hospital and have teeth extracted under general anaesthetic if there is tooth decay to the point where those teeth need extracting. And that has huge consequences for the National Health Service. It costs, I think in the last financial year, the cost of children having tooth extracted under general anaesthetic to the NHS in England was around £74.8 million. So actually what we're talking about is, it's not just protecting children's health, but it's actually having a financial impact on the economy as well. So those are the things that we know children are getting too much of. We also know that children aren't getting enough fibre. They're not getting enough oily fish. And on the whole, they're not getting enough fruits and vegetables as well. So you might be familiar with the 5 a day message. And actually what the National Diet and Nutrition Survey tells us is that children on average under the age of 5 are getting around 2.5 portions of fruits and vegetables every day. So that's around half what they should be getting. So there are lots of gaps, and there's also lots of key nutrients that are really crucial for this age. So in particular, iron is something that children really need to support both their physical health and their cognitive health at this age. So it's really crucial that we are getting nutrition right in those early years so that we can fill some of those gaps, we can set those eating habits early, and we can really help to prevent things like children living with obesity or overweight, prevent things like tooth decay later on, and also prevent some of those deficiencies like iron deficiency, for example.
One of the really impressive things about you is your work across the NHS and policy. Where do you see the biggest misunderstanding about early years nutrition?
Yeah, good question. I think the biggest misunderstanding for the early years is really about we have this expectation as adults, whether we're parents or we're early years educators, that children just sit down and eat. And our role as adults is to sort of get children to eat their food. We have this sort of expectation that, we have to get them to try, we have to get them to taste the food, we have to get them to have a few more mouthfuls, we have to get them to clean their plate. We like those empty plates as adults. And that tends to be a lot of the focus. And a lot of the questions I get, both from parents and from educators, is, how do I get them to eat this? And actually, my response to that is always, well, actually, it's not your job to get children to eat. It's not your job to strive for that empty plate. We often overlook that learning to eat is actually a really difficult task for children. It's one of the most sensory complex tasks that children will have to engage in, or adults even. As human beings, it is one of the most sensory difficult things that we have to do. So it's not a case of just sitting down and eating the food, a 2-step process. There are many, many sensory steps that children have to overcome in order to be able to actually get to the point of perhaps touching the food, let alone touching it to their lips or their tongue, or tasting that food. And our role as the educator or the parent or the carer is really to support that learning process. It's a really dynamic learning process that we need to nurture and we need to support in the same way you would as teaching a child to write their name or ride a bike or climb the climbing frame. Some children are going to need more support and more guidance and more hand-holding. They're going to need more reassurance for that. Other children will just crack on with it. So we really have to sort of focus on the child as an individual. And, when it comes to sort of trying to encourage children to eat a little bit more, I would say one of the biggest things that we need to sort of reframe as, again, either parents or carers or early years educators, is to actually focus on the child more and not how much food has been eaten. So rather than striving for that clean plate. We want to actually allow the child to tune in to their own hunger and satiety cues. Children are very good at self-regulating their own appetite. We see it when they're babies, they cry when they're hungry, and when they're full, they stop, they come off the breast, they come off the bottle. We know they've had enough. What tends to happen is as they get older and we go through weaning and then they're onto solid food, we as the adult, as the caregiver, try to take over a little bit. And we say, just have one more mouthful, just eat a little bit more. Come on, here comes the aeroplane. We get really creative in how we do that because we think we know best when it comes to how much that child needs to eat. And actually, it could be that internally, all of their appetite hormones and those internal signals from the child is saying, I'm full. I'm done now. That's enough for me. But here we are as the caregiver saying, just a little bit more. And so what we're doing is we're teaching them to override their internal hunger or their fullness cues. And actually what's important there is to try and forget about how much that child is eating and sit back and really notice the child, focus on their cues, their signals. It's what we call responsive feeding. So actually you are responding to the child's communication signals, and that could be body language. It could be clamping their mouth shut, turning their head away, pushing the food away. It could be that they are verbally telling you, no, I don't want it. And that might come out as a yuck, not eating that. These are all cues and communication signals that child doesn't want to eat that food at that particular time. And what we need to do as the adult is respect that and respond appropriately in a timely, in a way that sort of is appropriate to their developmental and their communication stage. And what happens then is the child feels trusted. The child feels like we are listening to them. They feel more in control. They feel more comfortable around food if we tune into those communication signals and we let the child be in charge, and we stop trying to take over and tell them how much they need to be eating. So the phrase I really like to use is, you provide, the child decides. So you as the caregiver, as the adult, you are providing the environment, you are providing the food, the tools, the seating, you can take care of all of that. That's your role. The child's role is to decide how much, if any, of that food they want to eat. And that's often where there's sort of a misunderstanding. As a caregiver, we feel like we should be determining how much they should be eating. And actually we want to just flip that on its head a little bit.
With that in mind, I mean, you've got a very prestigious career. You partner with 160 nurseries and advise on food and nutrition. What do you see settings do that have a really positive impact?
There are so many examples of great practice out there. We're seeing it more and more, which is fantastic. I think what's really positive is that we are starting to see, and have done for some time, we are starting to see food become a real part of that early years education. And that's absolutely crucial. So I think, some of the things I see is bringing food into that food education. It's about that food exposure. And often that happens most successfully when it's actually not a meal time or a snack time. It's through play, it's through exploration, it's allowing children to get curious with food outside of that mealtime context. And that can be really powerful and really helpful for children, particularly those who are cautious eaters. And the minute they know it's a mealtime or a snack time, they're starting to feel anxious because they know what's going to happen, and perhaps they know that they're expected to try or they're expected to clear their plate. So food education is absolutely key, and there are some great resources out there to support early years educators in doing this. Taste Ed is a fantastic example of that. That's a programme which really focuses on food education with no pressure. There's two rules with Taste Ed, and it's that you don't have to try it and you don't have to like it. And that's absolutely crucial to really taking that pressure off and allowing children to get curious with their food. There is so much really good examples of food education happening. And I think, that's a really great place to start.
So how closely is food provision linked to inspection outcomes from Ofsted, for example? Even when inspectors don't explicitly reference it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think now with the release of the new EYFS nutrition guidance, which came out in September 2025, we are seeing more of that the nutrition guidance coming into some of those discussions around inspections. What's difficult about the EYFS nutrition guidance is that there's not really an inspection framework model to go in alongside that. So actually the nutritional content of meals and menus at earlier settings still isn't clearly defined in terms of how that should be inspected. And we do need that. We need better monitoring of what food is being served and how food education is being involved. But it is being talked about more in Ofsted inspections. And I think the key thing is to recognise that actually food comes into all of the 7 areas of learning embedded in the EYFS. So, when we talk about communication and language, you can use different vocabulary to talk about food. We can name foods, we can talk about taste and flavour and texture. And so we can communicate and use language as a really powerful tool around food. Obviously, it comes into physical development, not just through the nutrition that you are providing through your food, but also through things like fine and gross motor skills and self-serving and all of those things that come into that aspect of physical development. You also have things like your numeracy and your literacy. So lots of books, and whether that's picture books or reading books, which include food. It could be recognising the names, recognising the words of different foods. It could be looking at recipes and recognising the words for literacy. For maths and numeracy, I saw a fantastic example from one of our early years settings at Nursery Kitchen a few weeks ago, where the preschool children were cutting up melons and then they were counting the seeds from the melons, and then they were actually measuring the size of the melon seeds as well with a teeny tiny ruler. So you can incorporate it into all of these things. Things like arts and creative design. You can use pasta shells, pasta necklaces. You can do potato printing. It comes into every single one of those areas. Understanding the world is another great example where you can bring food in, teach children about food from around the world, different cultures, what countries have different foods. It can be incorporated into all of those areas. It's also a huge part of working in partnership with parents. I think one of the great things that we can do with early years settings is we can try to bring parents into those messages. We can try and bring them into some of that food education, and we can share recipes. We can share examples of activities that we've done with children in the setting, so that we're extending those messages home in a very sort of gentle way, in an appropriate way. But lots of work that you can do around working in partnership with parents, and also, treating each child as an individual. That's really important when it comes to food provision as well. So you can demonstrate that through, understanding a child's individual needs when it comes to food. What are their dietary requirements, if there are any? Taking notice of how that child is feeling and behaving at meal times, a bit like what we talked about, responding to their cues. You are treating each child as an individual, not just sort of a blanket. This is lunchtime and everybody's going to eat exactly the same food and everybody needs to have a clean plate afterwards. So there are so many elements of that inspection framework that you can really use food as a tool to demonstrate all of those aspects. And I think if you do that as a setting, it will really show that food is a big part of your ethos, a big part of your values in your setting. And that really demonstrates how highly you value early years nutrition.
Fabulous. And what follow-up steps are available for training and operating guidance?
Yeah, this is a great question. This is one of the things that we're really missing as a sector. We had the new EYFS nutrition guidance come into place last year. What we didn't get alongside that was any additional funding to support that. But also the training is a huge gap. And this is one of the things that we identified in our report from Nursery Kitchen that we did last year, we commissioned last year on early years nutrition alongside the cross-party parliamentary group for a fit and healthy childhood. That was one of the key recommendations for the sector, is that we need some standardised training to go alongside it. We have the guidance now, which is embedded in EYFS. And for me as an early years nutritionist, that's really exciting. And it's a step in the right direction. It's a real acknowledgement that early years nutrition really does matter. And it should be a key focus embedded in EYFS. But actually, without the right training, how can we expect early years settings to really understand that and really apply it? So there are some great resources out there. And I would say, it's not consistent, it's not standardized, but different local authorities may have access to various different bits of training or potentially sort of menu accreditation schemes. So see what's available sort of locally within your local authority, if there is anything. There are also some great organisations. So the British Nutrition Foundation do offer some training around nutrition in the early years. The Early Years Alliance, as I said, Tasted is another great resource focused around food education. Here at Nursery Kitchen, we have some free webinars and free resources, which will really support settings as well. So there are lots of different things that you can tap into, but we do need to see more done in this area for sure.
So looking at things like budget pressures, the real world is that, nurseries are tight on funding. Things can be tough. How can nurseries deliver high nutritional standards without escalating costs? That's got to be on everybody's mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think particularly at the moment, more and more so, we're seeing that as a real challenge. It's one of the biggest barriers. It is possible to feed children really well on a budget. And I think this comes into three different categories for me. So firstly, planning. So I think plan your menus really well. Make sure that you have planned out your menu cycle, and you are therefore then only ordering food that you know is going to be used in your meals and your snacks. That's fundamental. You can also plan in where you might use any leftovers there as well. So if you bulk buy, often you will get a cheaper rate, or you'll get ingredients at a cheaper cost. So think about if you have got excess carrots because you've had to buy in bulk, where can you use them aside from that particular dish on your menu? Can you incorporate that into snacks or even second courses or side dishes as part of your menu? So really think about your planning, and then your purchasing as well. So when you are buying your food shop, wherever you get that from, really take care to shop around. So particularly focusing on own brands rather than branded products, you can make huge savings there. So actually, if you think about something like a Weetabix or a shop or a supermarket's own brand, you could get the exactly the same like Weetabix style breakfast cereal from your supermarket for a fraction of the price of the branded version. So think about things like that. Also using tinned goods or frozen goods. So particularly when it comes to things like fish, tinned fish is fantastic. If you make sure it's tinned in spring water or oil rather than brine, because the brine is very salty and that's not something we want to do for early years settings. But if you buy tinned fish rather than fresh fish, same nutritional value, but you will get it as a fraction of the cost. And the same with frozen as well. You can buy frozen fish instead of fresh fish and you will spend a fraction of the cost. Look out for those special offers as well. So when things are on offer, snap them up and then pop them in your freezer if you have space in your freezer. That's really important too. Also things like when you're planning your menus, things like beans, pulses, lentils, they are a fantastic source of protein, of iron, of fibre. And actually, as a nation, we need to be eating more of these foods. And there's a big campaign at the moment from the Food Foundation called Bang in Some Beans, where we are all being encouraged to eat more beans and pulses and lentils and chickpeas. They are a fantastic way to offer really great nutrition at a really reasonable cost. So you're not only there getting sort of good nutrition, you're getting an affordable source of iron-rich protein. They're also really good for the environment. So from a sustainability point of view, beans, pulses, lentils, chickpeas, really great for our planet too. So you get sort of a three wins there with your beans and your pulses. So that's your planning and your purchasing. The other area I would think about is your food waste. And really sort of trying to reduce your food waste as much as possible. Your freezer is a great friend to you. So when you're trying to reduce food waste, think about what you can freeze if you have the capacity to do that in your setting that you can use again at a later date. It's almost like pressing the pause button using your freezer. So even things like bread, You can freeze your milk if you've overdone it with milk. You can actually freeze sandwiches and defrost them and serve them again. So there's a really great website actually called Love Food Hate Waste, which is a fantastic resource. It's completely free. And what you can do on that website is you can put in an ingredient or a dish that you have got leftovers for, and it will tell you exactly how you can use it in other dishes. And it will also tell you how long it can be frozen for, and then also how to kind of defrost and reheat that carefully and safely. We're thinking about a very vulnerable group of children here, so we need to be careful about food safety. So that's a great resource to really help you manage your food waste and utilise it, and have some flex with your menus as well. So actually, if you know that you have got leftovers of a particular dish from a certain day, for whatever reason that might be, how could you incorporate that into snacks later on in the week so it gets used up, the children are still benefiting from that nutrition and it's not going to waste? So lots of things that you can do to make it affordable but still balanced and nutritious for children.
If you took over a nursery kitchen tomorrow, and I'm sure you have, what's the first thing you would change?
Can I be really biased and say partner with Nursery Kitchen?
You certainly can.
I think, yeah, I mean, I would love to say partner with Nursery Kitchen. What happens with Nursery Kitchen is you get a whole food team. We are an extension of that team, that early years team, and we can take care of the food provision and the quality and the safety and the nutrition. You get a nutritionist, you get a head of food, you get somebody who's going to take care of all that procurement and food waste. So in an ideal world, that would be a great way to help do that. I think if that's not an option for you, then really think about what support you can access. There are fantastic nutritionists out there who will support you with that menu planning and take some of that onus off of your shoulders. I think what's really important to recognise is that early year settings have a lot to manage. And some of the pushback from this new EYFS nutrition guidance that we have is that, yes, this is great, and we do recognise early years nutrition as being really important, but it's another thing for early years managers and early years settings to get their head around when actually the training isn't there, the funding isn't there. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Go out there, have a look what your local authority offer, have a look at those organisations like the British Nutrition Foundation. Early Start Nutrition is another great resource that has support with menu planning and menu accreditation. There are services out there that can support you with some of that menu planning and helping you to get it right. So don't be afraid to ask. I think also sort of look inwards as well and see in your setting, have you got a member of your team who is really passionate about early years nutrition? Have you got somebody who could lead on this for you? You don't, as a manager, you don't have to do all of this yourself. It might be that you have a member of your team who has a really keen interest in healthy eating, and they could become the advocate. They could become your food champion or your food hero, and they could take on that role. And if they are able to access bits and pieces of training and then disseminate that to the rest of the team, that's a great way to empower the whole setting. But you need somebody behind it who is super passionate and who wants to sort of lead and make change and develop this in your setting.
So should we take a look at food refusal and behaviour? Food refusal causes stress for practitioners. We know this. What is actually happening psychologically and developmentally when we see, how do we understand it?
Great question. And I think, actually that's a really important thing to touch on, is understanding food refusal is the first stage to helping you manage it, because actually you have to understand what's going on for the individual child. Now, food refusal is really, really common, and it's probably one of the biggest things that I get asked about with both parents and early years educators. There can be all sorts of reasons for food refusal. It can be a very normal stage of a child's development. What often happens is around about 18 months to 2 years, we see children go through this sort of pickiness, which maybe wasn't there before. Maybe they were great during the weaning stage and they ate everything, and now suddenly we are getting food refusal and we're getting a bit of pickiness and fussiness. That is not uncommon. And actually, this is a really normal developmental stage. And what's happening here is something we call food neophobia, which literally means the fear of new food. And what's happening, if you sort of took us back to hunter-gatherer times, imagine we're all living in caves. At that stage, around 18 months to 2 years, this is when the children are discovering that they don't have to rely on their primary caregiver to do everything for them. They are starting to flee the nest or flee the cave. They might be going out foraging for food themselves a little bit. And it's almost actually a very clever ancestral response to food to just say, oh, hang on a minute, that looks different. I'm not sure about that food. I don't recognise it, or it looks unusual. It's not how I normally see it. It could be poisonous. It could be toxic. So actually, it's a very clever mechanism to stop our cave children poisoning themselves. Now, what happens is obviously now in this day and age, we don't send our toddlers out foraging for food. But that neophobic response to food still exists. And for some children, it will be much more pronounced than others. Some children, you won't notice it at all. Other children, that neophobic response to food is there very strongly. And so it stops them sort of trying new foods or potentially trying a food that looks different. So, the classic example is one apple to the next might look really different. It's got different marks, different blemishes. So we suddenly don't trust it. Or the broken breadstick. I can't possibly eat that breadstick because that one's broken. It looks different. Something is telling them something's off here and I am not going near that broken breadstick. So that's a really normal sort of actually ancestral response, this food neophobia. And often what happens is if we put the right strategies into place, they will overcome that. They will sort of outgrow it fairly quickly. So that's probably one of the biggest things that we see developmentally. There can also be lots of other things going on. So remembering that food is a very sort of sensory heavy activity. Learning to eat is one of the most sensory complex tasks that we will engage in as human beings. And for some children, they will be very sensory aware and they will find certain textures, certain foods very, very challenging. They might have aversions to certain textures or flavours or even smells. Again, this is really normal. So it's really about sort of not pushing them to try foods that they're uncomfortable with, but creating that environment, nurturing them just like you would if a child was struggling to write their name or climb the climbing frame or ride a bike. We have to nurture them, support them in a pressure-free way through that process. There can also be medical reasons why children are refusing food. So sometimes we see food refusal in children who have had an undiagnosed food allergy for some time or possibly reflux. And when they were very little. And that's a sort of learned avoidance because what's happened there is that they have associated food with pain or discomfort. And so actually, psychologically, they have learned to avoid that food. So that can be quite challenging to overcome and often needs input from a sort of multidisciplinary team to overcome that. There's also a genetic element to food refusal as well. So we see that in twin studies. So actually, sometimes understanding the child, understanding the parent's history with feeding, we need to build this picture of what is going on for this child. Understanding their individual feeding behaviours is really going to help you to manage that food refusal in the right way. And what are 3 practical strategies leaders can implement to immediately overcome food refusal or overcome it at all? Yeah, good question. I would say there's no guarantee that you are immediately going to overcome it. I wish there was a magic wand for food refusal. I would be a very rich lady. But it is about sort of taking time. It's a marathon, not a sprint. My 3 top tips would be to focus on repeated exposure. So that means keep offering the food in a sort of gentle, pressure-free way. But the more children see food, the more familiar they will become with it. It becomes more predictable. It becomes more recognisable. So repeated exposure is absolutely key. And that can be hard, actually, because sometimes it might take, and there's lots of different research on this. There's no magic number, but sometimes it could be, 18 to 20 exposures before they will even go anywhere near that food. Now, as a parent or as an educator, you might sort of think, I've done it 15 times. They just don't like it. But don't give up. That repeated exposure is really, really key. So repeated exposure is the number one thing. Role modelling. also really, really powerful. And I think this is where early years settings have a really unique opportunity, because you have very powerful role models in your setting, whether that's peers or whether that is your staff. They can be fantastic role models for children when it comes to food. So if children see other people eating that food and hopefully enjoying that food, they will remember that. Even if they've gone nowhere near that food themselves, they will remember that experience positively. And when they next come across that food, they are more likely to want to sort of engage and take part or get curious about that food if they've seen other people enjoying it positively. And the third thing I would say is remember to keep the pressure off. It can be really easy to slip into that. Oh, just try it. I think you'll really like it. Lots of phrases that come from a really positive place can actually apply quite a lot of pressure. So think about your language, think about your terminology, your body language. Try not to pressure. Try to understand this from the child's point of view. And actually, they are trying to get to grips with very new foods that they are feeling quite unsure about. And we need to support them in a gentle, pressure-free, playful way. And the number one goal really is to ensure that they have a positive interaction with that food, so that next time they come back to it, oh yeah, that's carrots. I remember when my friend ate that and it was crunchy and it was loud and everybody was having lots of fun. They will remember that much more positively than, oh, that's carrot. I was, pressured to eat that. I really wasn't ready. I really didn't want to try. I didn't like the feel of it in my mouth. It was wet and it was cold and I didn't enjoy it. So we have to go at the child's pace. We have to take the pressure off. We have to really focus on the child and not the food, and certainly not that clean plate.
So looking at child development and nutrition, I recently read that the mouth is more active whilst chewing and eating than it is whilst speaking. Is there a link between nutrition and speech development?
Yeah, absolutely. They're quite closely linked. And, it makes sense when we think about the oral motor skills that are going on when you are eating. And this is where that weaning stage is really crucial. What tends to happen with weaning is that we take our time with food. We might start with smooth, thin purees, and then we gradually make those purees thicker, gradually move on to lumpy foods, and then eventually sort of chopped pieces of food. And that transition is really helpful, because what children are doing is they are building up their oral motor skills. It starts with sort of, tongue lateralization, which is moving the food side to side in the mouth. So they're building up their tongue, their mouth, their jaw muscles very gradually as we adapt the texture of food. And helping, again, doing this at the child's pace is really important, so that they can build up those skills, build up those oral motor skills and the muscles that are needed to manipulate the food around the mouth. That sort of chomping, chewing comes a little bit later before they can swallow the food. And so all of those things are crucial for feeding, but also have a big impact on speech and language as well. And this is where speech and language therapists are often a really important part of a child who is struggling with food progression or is struggling with sort of extreme food refusal. They are an absolutely crucial professional to bring in as part of that multidisciplinary team to help overcome that, because they will be looking at the oral motor skills and what's lacking and what do we need to do there to help actually build up the skills so that the child can physically eat.
And what signals should practitioners watch for that may be nutrition related?
Yeah, great question. I think there are lots of things, and food can be so related to other areas. Sometimes we see kind of food refusal present itself first, and there could be other developmental things going on, particularly with some of those sensory aversions. So if you notice a child is very particular about how the food is served, particularly in terms of textures. Often it's the sort of wet textures that they don't like, the sort of wetter, slimy, runnier textures, and the crunchier textures they're okay with, but it can absolutely be the other way around. So if you're noticing sort of quite significant sensory aversions to food, that could be a bit of a red flag, that there might be other things going on for that child. Also, going back to those kind of textures, if you have a child who is stuck on pureed food for quite some time, sort of, beyond that 8, 9, 10 month age frame where hopefully we would see them actually moving on to more lumpy foods, that can also be a sign that they're not on the sort of appropriate texture of food. And what is the reason for that? We need to, as I say, treat every child as an individual, unpick that a little bit. Is it because it's a lack of oral motor skills, or is it actually they haven't been exposed so much to the lumpy foods, the harder foods, the finger foods, and they haven't had the chance to practice those skills? So various different things from a sort of developmental point of view that you might notice.
And how important is adult behaviour around food in shaping children's long-term eating habits?
Yeah, hugely important. And I think, adult behaviour around food is one of the biggest predictors for how a child is going to eat as they get older. We play a massive role as a parent or a carer. You are a fantastic role model. You can also be a bad role model, of course. And the research shows us that. So the research demonstrates that actually if parents eat more fruits and vegetables, their child is more likely to eat fruits and vegetables as they get older. On the other end of the scale, if a parent is eating more highly processed foods and snack foods and foods higher in fat, salt and sugar, then that is what the child is likely to eat. So, it's about what the child is seeing and then for replicating. But also I think, there can be more subtle things that we do as parents or carers that will impact a child's response to food. And this is probably a particular focus for early years settings, because even the slightest sort of screw up of the nose when the fish pie comes out, or if it's not your favourite food and you really struggle with that as an adult, it can be really difficult to sit there whilst the children are eating something that you are finding quite physically difficult to be around. And so even the slightest sort of bits of body language, your verbal language as well has an important impact to play. So it's really difficult, but as an early years educator, if you can leave all of those opinions and those preferences at the door and try to talk positively, try to use positive body language about the food in front of the children, that is going to really support them. If they see you screwing your nose up or making a negative comment or, what is that? It can be really subtle, but children notice all of these things. So we need to be careful about our language. We need to be careful about our body language, so that we can really reassure children and support them in getting curious with that food, even though we may not like it ourselves.
So what should leaders be training staff to do in that example that you've given me?
There's so much that you can do as a leader. And I think actually we tend to focus so much on what is the food, what's on our menu, what food are we serving? But actually, aside from your menu, what's going on in that room is absolutely crucial. So I would say, if you're a leader of an earlier setting, you want to really reassure your staff that they, and also sort of inspire them, that they can make a real difference in that room. Their role really, really matters. So the language that they use, the body language, how they respond to food, how they sort of present the meals, all of those things could make the difference between a child getting curious about that food or refusing it altogether. So that's a really powerful gift that you have as an early years educator. So I would say, take the pressure off. It's not about cleaning plates. It's not about trying the food. It's really about creating an environment where a child feels secure, they feel safe. Right here, right now, in this space, in this moment in time, I feel comfortable, I feel safe, I feel secure, I'm surrounded by trusted adults. I know I'm not going to be sort of pushed or coerced or bribed or encouraged too much to eat that food. I can do that at my own pace. And that can be difficult as an early years educator. It sort of contradicts what we want to do because it comes from a really good place, that encouragement, that, just have one bite of broccoli, just try it. I think you'll like it. Have this and then you can have your pudding. And actually all of those phrases and all of those comments come with quite a lot of pressure because you are expecting the child to try. There is an expectation there that the child feels that they need to try this food, even if they are not ready from a sensory, from a physical point of view, from an emotional point of view. And it's going to change from day to day, because so much of feeding is very emotionally, very sort of sensory led. So it might be that one day a child feels really curious about food and they will try that broccoli. And the next day or a few days later, there might be other things going on. They're feeling unsettled, they're a bit under the weather, they've maybe sat in a different position and it's not next to their favourite staff member, or it's not next to their friend. And actually then from a sensory readiness point of view, they are not in this state of what we call felt safety. They are not right here, right now, feeling safe, secure, comfortable. And so internally things are changing for them. And they feel like, no, I'm not ready to try that food. I'm not feeling comfortable today. I'm not ready to take that next step. So this is where it really is, you're focusing, you're tuning in on how is the child feeling? Are they comfortable? Are they sat securely? Their seating position is really, really key. Have they got good postural stability? Are they resting their feet on the floor? If they're not feeling comfortable in the position that they're sat in, they get fidgety, they're moving around. And actually, that can get quite tiring. So they want to leave the table and get themselves out of that situation more quickly. So I would say take the pressure off, focus on how the child is feeling. And your goal is not to get that child to eat. Your goal is to create that environment, make the child feel safe and secure, demonstrate, do all of that lovely role modelling, but without the pressure, without that sort of, okay, now you try. Take that away and you will get much more success with food.
So from let's discuss policy perspectives on this. You've worked at policy level. What's currently missing nationally in early years nutrition strategy?
Great question. And this is one of the things that we really pulled out from our report last year that Nursery Kitchen commissioned with the cross-party parliamentary group for a fit and healthy childhood. There are two key things that I would ask from a policy level when it comes to early years food provision. The first thing is funding. So what we saw last year was that free school meals were extended to all children on universal credit in England. The same doesn't apply to early years. So if you could have a child who is in reception who receives a free school meal, but you could have a child from the same family who is at an early years setting and they don't get the same free early years meal. And that's because the funding isn't the same. So to get an early years free meal, you have to be in a state-funded setting. There are lots of other constraints around that free school meal as well. So you have to attend a certain number of hours. You have to be attending before and after lunch. It's not the same as the criteria for free school meals. So what I would love to see from a policy perspective is that the conditions for free school meals are extended to early years settings as well, regardless of whether they are a private, voluntary, independent or state-funded setting. We have so many children who are missing out on full meals. There was a fantastic report from Impact on Urban Health last year that identified 290,000 children who are living in poverty, who are missing out on a free meal, but they would be getting one if they were in reception. And so this is just widening the health inequalities. It's widening that health gap. So we really need to plug that gap and we need to extend free school meals to early year settings. That's my number one ask. I have another one.
Well, okay. It's fortuitous because my next question is if you could change one policy tomorrow, what would it be?
So for the funding, first thing, I do have two. The second one is the training. We've talked about it a little bit already. We have the new EYFS nutrition guidance. And as I say, I really welcome that guidance. I think it's fantastic to have that. But we do need some consistent training to support settings in implementing that as well. At the moment, they're sort of left to their own devices. And there are some great resources out there that they can tap into. But we need something national that really supports early years settings. I would love to see early years nutrition training embedded into an early years educator's qualification. Because if we put it in there as part of everything else that they're learning, it really supports the fact that early years nutrition is important. It is impacting all the other areas of development. And you know then that every qualified early years educator is getting that training right from the start.
Can you give nursery leaders a simple 5-step checklist to improve nutrition in their settings, please?
Yes, 5 steps. So firstly, I would say go and have a look at the EYFS nutrition guidance if you're not already familiar with it. The way it has been designed to be more user-friendly than any other voluntary guidance that we've had before. It reflects the way, the format, the template that the EYFS guidance is set out. So it should be familiar. Hopefully it's a bit easier to navigate than anything we've had before. There are also some really useful links in there to other resources, to signposting. So it's not a hugely lengthy document, but there are links that will signpost you to other areas for support. So have a look at that. Try and get your head around that. What's really important is when you are menu planning is to have an understanding of what the 4 main food groups are. So that's your fruits and vegetables, your starchy carbohydrates, your dairy foods, and your iron-rich proteins. Those are the 4 main food groups that we really need to focus on when you're planning your menus. So again, there is information about that in the EYFS nutrition guidance, but try and get familiar with those 4 main food groups and keep those at the forefront of your mind when you are menu planning or purchasing for your food. I would also say try to engage somebody in your setting as that food champion, as that food hero. Who have you got in your setting that is passionate about this and is going to drive it and is going to be able to be that force for engaging the rest of the team, engaging parents, and sharing that information more widely. You don't, as a nursery manager or a leader, have to do everything yourself. Share that load, but find that passionate person. You really need somebody who cares and who is interested in this behind it. I would also say think about your food education. If you do nothing else, that food education is really, really powerful. And as I've mentioned, a fantastic organisation called Tasted who will support you. They have fantastic resources. They can come to your setting and they can deliver training for your early years educators on food education. And then their number 2 goals is to, there is no pressure to try and there is no pressure to like. That's really, really important. So it's food education in a really playful, non-pressureful way. We want to focus on that because actually getting children curious about food, getting children familiar with food, it starts with food education, often outside of mealtime contexts. So think about your food education. And then the 5th thing I would say is tap into your parents and your families and your carers. We want to try and engage them. We want to try and extend some of these health and nutrition messages back home. And that could be as simple as inviting them in for a parent taster. It could be that you share recipes that you know the children enjoy at home. What's really key is that we sort of do that in a gentle way. You know your family's best. So we want to do it with no judgment. Parents are having to tackle an awful lot at home as well, particularly when it comes to food and our food system and the cost of food. So we want to do it gently, but there's a lot you can do to support your families and your carers as well.
Fantastic. And that leads into my next question from listeners. We've got a listeners' question panel here. So from Shelley, how can nurseries promote healthy eating at home and engage with parents? How does that look? Yeah,
great question. And this will vary depending on your parents and your families. I think as an early years setting, you are uniquely placed to have those conversations with parents and carers. You tend to have a good relationship and that takes time to build up. So I would say sort of, tread carefully. This isn't about lecturing parents about what they're putting in lunchboxes or what you see them serving as a after nursery snack. There is a reason why parents are serving these things, and we need to understand that. There was a great report from the Food Foundation on early years nutrition, which looked at what influences parent choice when it comes to food. And the number one thing that parents focus on when they choose food for their youngsters, for their little ones, is health and nutrition. So they do care. They are focused on this. The number 2 thing that influenced their choice was the cost. And we know that that is a huge barrier. Parents are often either financially poor or they're time poor. And so we are reaching for convenient snacks. We are reaching for those things in packets, which actually, when they're marketed to us as parents, it makes them look like they are really healthy. They have health claims on there. They say it's 1 of your 5 a day, no nasties. All of these marketing claims teach parents that these are a good, healthy choice for our children. And often, actually, they're not the best choice. So it's not that parents are making bad choices out of choice. They want to do the healthy option, but sometimes it's a time issue or it's a cost issue that stops them from doing that. So we need to have empathy for that. And I think what's important is when you're doing any sort of education with parents and families is that there's no judgment. There's always a reason why parents are making these choices. So we want to get parents on board. We want to build those relationships with them. So we need to go gently. And as I say, you're really well placed. You know your parents best. We want a sort of blanket approach, but invite them in. Do tasters, even if that's just snacks, so they can see how you are presenting food. They can see how you're making it look appealing. They can see how you make it look appetizing for children, and teach them some of the nutrition messages that you have learned or that you're aware of. You can talk to them about different things, whether that is, how much sugar there is in certain snacks or drinks, but do it in a gentle, non-judgmental way and go gently. This is, again, it's a marathon, not a sprint. We want to build those relationships. We want to keep parents engaged. We want to keep them involved, ask for their input, ask for their feedback. And we want to sort of make sure that parents feel included in that as well. So if you've got parents from different backgrounds or cultures, bring that into some of the celebrations, or bring that into some of your education, your recipe sharing. Some of the lovely examples I've seen other settings do is kind of create a family cookbook. So parents can submit a recipe and you can choose the ones that fit your healthy eating ethos and create a nursery family cookbook together so that you can share that with other parents and carers.
That's incredibly inclusive, isn't it? What a fascinating idea. And from Sarah, how can nurseries realistically meet or even exceed national guidance with the current expectations on settings? She gives the example, as a tutor, how can I best support my apprentice to ensure she is well prepared to support current nutritional guidance?
Great question. And I think, first of all, hats off to you for acknowledging the guidance and understanding that it's out there, and then looking to how you can comply with it. Or, as you say, go above and beyond. Have a really good read through that early years foundation stage nutrition guidance. There is quite a lot of detail in there. And as I say, there are additional links that will support you in understanding that. There will be additional bits of training that you can tap into. British Nutrition Foundation, Early Start Nutrition, us here at Nursery Kitchen as well. Lots of resources on our website, on our blogs about meeting that guidance and what you need to do. I think don't be afraid to reach out. There are so many organisations, some of those I've mentioned, that do have some fantastic resources. First Steps Nutrition is another one, which really talks about sort of menu planning. They have some great resources on portion sizes and lunch boxes as well. Some fantastic organisations out there who will be very happy to hear from you if you are trying to meet that nutrition guidance, but you are wondering where to turn, or you're stuck on a particular area of it. So reach out, have those conversations, and access as much as you can. It may be worth tapping into your local authority as well. Some local authorities, and again, this is where the inconsistency is a little frustrating because it depends where you are in the country. But some local authorities will actually have menu accreditation schemes that they can review your menus and they can guide you in terms of what might be lacking in meeting those nutrition standards, and they will tell you sort of what you're doing well and what tweaks you might need to make to meet that guidance. So have a look locally as well and see if there is anything freely available to you. But yeah, I think this is where that training is really lacking. And we need something more consistent, available nationally, a one place where settings can go to for trusted, evidence-based advice. We don't have it yet. We hope it will be on its way, but there are organisations who are offering various different services. So certainly don't be afraid to reach out to those if there's something that you're needing.
Fabulous. If a nursery leader is listening today and implements just one change this month, what do you want it to be?
Oh, a tough question. One thing. I would say the one thing to focus on is to acknowledge feeding as a dynamic learning process. It's not a tick box, let's refuel our children and move on with the day. It's not a sit down, clear your plate and off we go. It is really focusing on learning to eat just as you would with any other area of the early years development. So take that pressure off. Take that pressure off yourselves, take that pressure off the children and off the families. Focus on that child and really support them. It needs to be nurtured. It's not a sort of two-step process where children sit down and they eat their food. We need to tune in with a child-focused lens. And what is that child finding hard about that mealtime? If you're experiencing food refusal or anything else that might be going on, there is a reason for that. And we need to really tune into the child and try to unpick that a little bit rather than thinking it's a failure and that they haven't eaten it, so this mealtime's a disaster. You really need to think of it as a dynamic learning process that you are supporting that child with.
That's really insightful. Thank you so much. And final question, where can people find out more about Nursery Kitchen and the amazing work that you do?
So I would say head to our website, nurserykitchen.co.uk. We have a tab on there called Nourishing News and Tasty Tips. All of our resources, our webinars you will find on there, they are all free to access for any early years setting. So please do have a look through. We've got lots of blogs, lots of resources, lots of fact sheets, and all of our webinars are on there as well. And follow us on social media because we will keep you up to date with any upcoming live webinars that we have, and all of our news will also be on there as well.
Wonderful. And I hope people will go and check that out. And Catherine, I just want to say a massive thank you. I found today incredibly insightful, and I'm sure our listeners have too.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.